My son-in-law looked at the wooden recipe box I'd brought to my granddaughter's christening and laughed so hard his champagne spilled. "Did you seriously dig this out of a dumpster, Grandma?" He held it up for the whole table to see. My daughter didn't stop him. She just looked away. The priest was still at the door saying goodbye to guests. I stood there holding my purse with both hands while 40 people in that rented banquet hall watched my gift become a punchline. But here's the thing. That recipe box had a false bottom, and what was underneath it would have paid for every house on that street. I said nothing. I picked up the box, tucked it under my arm, and walked out into the October rain without an umbrella. The next Monday, I brought it to my attorney. He opened the false bottom, looked at what was inside, and his hands started shaking. "Mrs. Brennan," he whispered, "do you understand what this is worth?" I understood perfectly. I'd been waiting 34 years for someone to ask. Hey, quick question before we go on. Have you ever given someone a gift that meant everything to you and watched them treat it like garbage? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. Some details here are fictionalized for storytelling, but the lesson is completely real. Now, back to what happened with that attorney. My name is Ruth Brennan. I'm 63 years old, and for the past 31 years, I've worked as a seamstress at a dry cleaner in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Not the nice part of Bridgeport. The part where the sidewalk cracks run so deep, weeds grow through them in summer. I take the 5:40 bus every morning. I press suits and mend hems and replace buttons for people who never look at my face when they pick up their clothes. My hands have permanent needle marks. My back hurts from bending over the pressing machine 8 hours a day. I live in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on Elm Street. Rent is $975 a month. I've lived there since 1990. Create. What nobody knows, not my daughter, not my neighbors, not the man who owns the dry cleaner, is that I also own the building the dry cleaner is in, and the one next to it, and 23 others across Fairfield County. My real estate portfolio is worth $28 million. I have a brokerage account with another $6 million in index funds. And the recipe box I brought to that christening contained the original deed to a commercial property on State Street that I purchased in 1991 for $60,000. It's now assessed at $4.3 million. I was going to sign it over to my granddaughter Lily, a trust fund in a recipe box, because I'd built my fortune the same way I'd built my recipes. One ingredient at a time. From scratch, with patience. But my son-in-law, Craig Whitfield, decided it was junk. Let me tell you about Craig. My daughter Diane married him 4 years ago. He works in pharmaceutical sales, makes about $95,000 a year, which he treats like $400,000. Leased Audi. Country club membership he can barely cover. Watches that cost more than my car. He comes from the Whitfield family of Greenwich, old money that ran out 2 generations ago but kept the attitude. His mother, Judith, still wears pearls to the grocery store and talks about the help like it's 1,955. The first time Diane brought Craig home to my apartment, he looked around my one bedroom like he was touring a crime scene. He opened the refrigerator, saw my leftovers in mismatched containers, and turned to Diane with a look I'll never forget. Pity mixed with disgust. "Your mom lives here?" He didn't whisper it. Diane's face went red. Not with anger at him, with embarrassment. At me. That was the moment I knew I'd made a mistake. Not in how I lived, but in what I'd failed to teach my daughter. I raised her to be humble. Instead, she learned to be ashamed. The christening was at St. Michael's in Fairfield. Craig's family insisted on the venue. Judith handled the guest list. My daughter handled the apologies. "Mom, just wear something nice, okay? Craig's partners will be there." I wore my best dress, the navy one I bought at Marshall's for Diane's college graduation. Still fit. I arrived early, sat in the back pew, watched my granddaughter get blessed by a priest whose name I couldn't pronounce. Lily was perfect. 7 months old, sleeping through the whole thing, wrapped in a white blanket I'd sewn by hand with lace trim I'd tatted myself. That blanket took me 3 months. Judith leaned over to Craig during the ceremony and said something I could just barely hear. "At least the blanket is handmade." That's quaint. Quaint. Like I was a craft fair exhibit. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the banquet hall Craig had rented. Open bar, catered Italian, flower arrangements on every table. I calculated the cost in my head. 12,000, maybe 15. Craig was already 3 months behind on his car lease. I knew because I'd looked. Not snooping, protecting. A mother has a right to know if her daughter's family is financially stable. They weren't. When it came time for gifts, Judith presented a Tiffany silver frame engraved with Lily's initials. Craig's business partner gave a $500 savings bond. Someone brought a cashmere baby blanket still in the Nordstrom bag. Then I walked up with my recipe box. It was maple wood. My mother had made it in 1962. Dovetail joints, hand-carved lid, a small brass latch that still clicked perfectly after 60 years. Inside, I'd placed 30 of my mother's original recipe cards in her handwriting, plus the deed in a sealed envelope taped to the false bottom. I held it out to Diane. "This was your grandmother's. I want Lily to have it." Diane took it carefully, opened the lid, and saw the recipe cards. Her face went through 3 emotions in 2 seconds: confusion, disappointment, recognition. "Mom, these are Grandma's recipes." "They are." Craig leaned over. He picked up the box, turned it over like he was checking for a price tag, and that's when he laughed. "Did you seriously dig this out of a dumpster, Grandma?" He said it loud enough for the whole room. A few people chuckled. Judith covered her mouth with her hand, not to hide shock, to hide her smile. My daughter said nothing. She just stared at the tablecloth. I reached across, took the box back, and tucked it under my arm. "Thank you for a lovely ceremony," I said to no one in particular. Then I walked out. The rain was cold. October in Connecticut. I didn't run. I walked to the bus stop, sat on the wet bench, and waited 17 minutes for the 4:15 back to Bridgeport. The recipe box sat on my lap, dry under my coat. Inside, it was the deed worth $4.3 million, and in that envelope, I'd also placed a letter explaining everything. My properties, my investments, my plan for Lily's future. All of it, written in my own hand, the same way my mother had written her recipes. Nobody opened it. Nobody even tried. That night I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision. I opened my fireproof safe, the one hidden behind the water heater in my closet. Inside were 24 property deeds, filed by street address, stock certificates, bank statements from 3 different institutions, a folder labeled Diane Trust containing $6.2 million in assets I'd planned to transfer when she turned 40. She turned 40 next March. I pulled that folder out and set it on the table. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney, Martin Cho. Martin had handled my real estate transactions for 15 years. He was the only person on earth who knew the full picture. "Ruth, it's Sunday evening. I know. I need you to freeze the trust transfer for Diane. Indefinitely." Silence. "Ruth, that's $6.2 million. You've been planning this for—" "I know what I've been planning. I'm also telling you what I'm changing." "And Martin, I need the name of a good forensic accountant." "What kind of forensic?" "The kind who finds money that isn't where it should be." Martin paused. "I'll send you a name tomorrow." "Tonight." He sent it within an hour. Gloria Vasquez, CPA, former IRS auditor. 15 years of experience unraveling financial fraud. I emailed her before midnight. 3 days later, I sat across from Gloria Vasquez in her office in Stamford. She was in her 50s. No nonsense, reading glasses on a chain. The kind of woman who'd seen every financial lie a person could tell and wasn't impressed by any of them. "Mrs. Brennan, you want me to investigate your son-in-law. I want to know where his money comes from and where it goes. What specifically concerns you?" "He makes $95,000. He spends like he makes $300,000. He's behind on his car lease. But he just rented a banquet hall for $15,000 and gave his wife a diamond bracelet for their anniversary." Gloria wrote something down. "That gap usually means one of 3 things: family, money, debt, or something illegal. His family money ran out years ago. I've seen the debt. I want to know about the third option. Give me 2 weeks." I gave her 2 weeks and $8,000, worth every penny. When Gloria called me back, her voice had that particular flatness professionals use when they're about to deliver very bad news. Mrs. Brennan, your son-in-law has been filing fraudulent insurance claims through his pharmaceutical company. He submits false expense reports for doctor visits that never happened, conference trips he never took, client dinners at restaurants that don't exist. Over the past 3 years, he's collected approximately $410,000 in fraudulent reimbursements. I set down my tea. $410,000. And that's just what I can document. There may be more. He's also been forging his supervisor's signature on approval forms. This isn't just company fraud. If his employer reports it, this becomes wire fraud. Federal. Has anyone noticed? Not yet. But his company is switching to a new expense management system next quarter. Automated auditing. When that system goes live, every claim he's ever submitted gets flagged and reviewed. When does the new system go live? January 15th. I looked at my calendar. 11 weeks away. Gloria, who at the company handles internal investigations. Their compliance officer is a woman named Patricia Huang, very thorough, very by the book. Can you package everything you found and send it to me? Every document, every false claim, every forged signature. Of course, but Mrs. Brennan, I have to ask, what are you going to do with it? I'm going to make sure my daughter isn't collateral damage. I spent the next week doing 2 things. First, I called Martin Cho and had him draft a legal separation of assets for Diane, a document proving she had no knowledge of and no involvement in Craig's fraud. Bank records showing her accounts were completely separate. Tax returns filed independently, nothing connecting her to his crimes. Second, I made a phone call I'd been putting off for 4 years. I called Philip Brennan, my ex-husband, Diane's father. We divorced in 1993 when Diane was 7. Phil wasn't a bad man, just a man who couldn't handle being married to a woman who was smarter with money than he was. When I bought my first rental property in 1990, a 2-family house in Stratford for $78,000, Phil told me I was throwing money away. When I bought my second, he said I was obsessed. When I bought my third, he filed for divorce. Phil was living in Florida now, retired. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, but he answered on the second ring. Ruthie. Phil, I need your help with Diane. What's wrong? Her husband is a criminal, and she doesn't know it. I told him everything. The fraud, the forged signatures, the $410,000. Phil was quiet for a long time. Ruthie, you have to tell her. She won't believe me. She'll defend him. She'll say I'm jealous of the Whitfield family, that I'm trying to ruin her marriage because I'm just a seamstress who doesn't understand their world. Then what's the plan? I'm going to let her see it for herself. But I need you there when it happens. When? Thanksgiving. Phil was quiet again. Thanksgiving is at Judith's house. Not this year. This year, it's at mine. Your apartment? No. My other property. I could almost hear Phil's jaw drop through the phone. Your what? I smiled. It was the first time I'd smiled in weeks. I own a building on State Street in downtown Bridgeport, bought it in 1991 when the city was practically giving away commercial real estate. It's a 3-story brick building, former textile factory, beautiful bones. I converted the ground floor into a community kitchen and food pantry in 2015. The second floor is rented to a nonprofit tutoring center. The third floor is empty. I'd been saving it. Now I knew what it was for. I hired a contractor to convert the third floor into a community dining hall. Long tables, industrial kitchen, seating for 60. The work took 5 weeks. I supervised every detail myself, coming straight from the dry cleaner every evening, still smelling like pressing steam and starch. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I sent the invitations. Handwritten, on cream cardstock, in my best penmanship. You are invited to Thanksgiving dinner hosted by Ruth Brennan, 142 State Street, 3rd floor, Thursday, November 28th, 2 p.m. I sent one to Diane and Craig, one to Judith, one to Phil, and 40 others to families I'd met through the food pantry downstairs. Single mothers, elderly couples on fixed incomes, veterans, teachers, people who reminded me of myself. Diane called me that evening. Mom, what is this? You're hosting Thanksgiving at some address on State Street? That's correct. But we always go to Judith's. Not this year. Mom. Craig's boss is coming to Judith's dinner. This is important for his career. Diane, I'm asking you to come to my dinner. Just this once. Silence. I heard Craig's voice in the background. Tell her we're busy. Diane came back. Mom, I don't think we can make it. Lily's first Thanksgiving, I said quietly. Another silence. Longer this time. Fine, Diane said. We'll come for an hour. That's all I need. I hung up and looked at the calendar. 12 days. 12 days until my daughter sat in a building she didn't know I owned, at a table surrounded by people she'd never met, and learned the truth about every single person in her life, including me. The week before Thanksgiving, I visited Craig's office building. Not inside, just the parking lot across the street. I sat in my 2009 Honda Civic, the one Craig called a museum piece at the christening, and watched. At 5:30 p.m., Craig walked out with a woman I didn't recognize. Blonde, mid-30s, business suit. They stood by his Audi talking for 10 minutes. She touched his arm twice. He leaned close to say something, and she laughed the way women laugh when they want a man to keep talking. I took 3 photos with my phone. Not for evidence, for confirmation. Craig wasn't just a thief. He was careless. Careless people always get caught. The only question was when and by whom. On Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, Gloria Vasquez called. Mrs. Brennan, I have an update. Craig's company just announced they're accelerating the new expense system rollout. It goes live December 1st instead of January 15th, 5 days after Thanksgiving. Correct. Once that system activates, every fraudulent claim he's ever submitted will be flagged within 72 hours. Thank you, Gloria. I hung up and finished setting the tables on the 3rd floor of 142 State Street. 60 place settings. Real china I'd collected from estate sales over the years. Cloth napkins I'd sewn myself. Centerpieces made from autumn leaves and candles. At 1:45 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day, the first guests arrived. Maria Gonzalez, a home health aide with 3 kids, carrying a pan of arroz con gandules. Thomas Everett, a 78-year-old Vietnam veteran who volunteers at the food pantry, holding a pecan pie, his late wife's recipe. Linda Park, a middle school teacher whose husband left her last spring, with her 2 daughters carrying bread rolls. By 2, the room was full. 43 people laughing, helping in the kitchen, arranging chairs. The smell of turkey and roasted vegetables filled the 3rd floor. Phil arrived at 2:10. He looked around the dining hall with wide eyes. Ruthie, you built this. I did. When you said other property, I thought you meant a condo. I meant this. He shook his head slowly. I was such an idiot to leave. Yes. But you're here now. At 2:25, I heard heels on the staircase. Judith's heels. She appeared in the doorway, first, pearl necklace in place, cashmere coat over her arm, her face arranging itself into polite horror as she took in the scene, folding chairs, mismatched china, children running between tables, a veteran in a wheelchair telling a joke to a woman in scrubs. Behind her, Craig and Diane. Craig was carrying Lily in her car seat with one hand, phone in the other. He didn't look up from his screen until he was fully inside the room. Then he stopped. What is this? He looked at Diane. Your mother is hosting Thanksgiving in a warehouse? It's a community dining hall, I said from the kitchen doorway. I was wearing an apron over my good dress. I built it. Craig looked at me like I'd spoken another language. You built it. With what? With the money I've earned over the past 34 years. Judith touched Diane's arm. Sweetheart, this is very charitable. But perhaps we should sit down, I said. Not harshly, but firmly. All of you. Dinner is ready. Something in my voice made them comply. Maybe it was the fact that I'd never spoken to any of them with authority before. I'd always been the quiet seamstress, the woman who pressed other people's clothes and ate leftovers from mismatched containers. Not today. Dinner was served family style. Turkey I'd brined for 2 days, sweet potatoes with brown butter, collard greens from Maria's recipe, cornbread from Thomas's wife's recipe, cranberry sauce I'd made from scratch, the way my mother taught me. The recipes from that box Craig had called dumpster trash. Craig barely touched his food. He kept checking his phone. At one point, I saw his face go pale. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. I followed at a distance and heard him whisper into the phone. "What do you mean, audit? The system doesn't go live until January." A pause. "December 1st? That's in 5 days. That can't be right." Another pause. "Longer. How much can they see?" He hung up and stood in the hallway for a full minute, both hands on the back of his neck, staring at the ceiling. Then he walked back in, sat down, and poured himself a large glass of wine. After dinner, I stood up. The room quieted. "I want to say something," I began. "Most of you know me as Ruth. Some of you know me as the lady who runs the food pantry downstairs. Some of you know me as the seamstress at Park Avenue Cleaners." I looked at Craig. He wasn't listening. He was back on his phone. "What most of you don't know is that I own this building. I bought it in 1991 for $60,000. I also own 23 other properties across Fairfield County. Their combined value is approximately $28 million. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a full table. The absolute silence of 43 people trying to process an impossible sentence. Diane's fork clattered against her plate. Craig looked up from his phone. Judith's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. "I started with nothing," I continued. "A sewing machine, a job pressing clothes, and $200 a month I saved by eating rice and beans 5 nights a week. I bought my first property when Diane was 5 years old, a duplex in Stratford. I fixed it up at night after my shifts and rented it to a family just like mine. The rent covered the mortgage and left enough for a down payment on the next one." I paused. I never told anyone because I wanted to see if the people in my life would treat me with respect regardless of what I had. Some of you in this room have treated me with kindness every single day without knowing any of this. Maria brings me soup when I'm sick. Thomas walks me to my bus stop when it's dark. Linda's daughters call me Grandma Ruth. I looked at my daughter. And some of you have treated me like I was invisible. Like my work wasn't worth respecting. Like a recipe box from my mother was garbage. Craig's face was the color of chalk. Diane's mouth was open. No sound came out. "There's something else," I said. "This building, 142 State Street, isn't just a dining hall. Starting in January, the upper 2 floors are being converted into 12 affordable apartments for families on the waiting list at the Bridgeport Housing Authority. Teachers, nurses, home health aides, veterans, people who work harder than anyone in Greenwich and still can't afford a safe place to live." I reached under the table and pulled out a manila envelope. "And this is the deed to this building. I was going to give it to my granddaughter Lily at her christening. It was in the recipe box. Inside a sealed envelope, under a false bottom that nobody bothered to open." I set the envelope on the table. "The property is currently assessed at $4.3 million. Judith made a sound that was halfway between a gasp and a whimper. Craig pushed back from the table. "This is insane," he said. "You expect us to believe that a woman who presses shirts for a living is worth—" "Craig," my voice was steady. "Sit down. You've been lying to us. You've been hiding. I've been watching. There's a difference." Diane finally spoke. "Mom." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" "Because I needed to know who you'd become. And now I do." Before anyone could respond, the stairwell door opened. A woman in a dark blazer walked in, professionally dressed, badge visible on her belt. Behind her, a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. Craig saw the badge first. His whole body went rigid. "Mr. Whitfield?" The woman stepped forward. "I'm Patricia Huang, Chief Compliance Officer at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. This is David Chen from our legal department. We need to speak with you." The blood drained from Craig's face completely. "How did you—" "Your company's new expense auditing system was tested early this week on a sample of high-value accounts. Yours was in the sample." Patricia Huang's voice was professional and cold. "We've identified 312 fraudulent expense claims totaling $410,000 submitted over 36 months. We've also identified 17 forged authorization signatures. That's not I can explain." "Mr. Whitfield, Meridian has filed a criminal referral with the FBI. You'll be contacted by federal investigators within the week. In the meantime, your employment is terminated effective immediately." Diane stood up so fast her chair fell backward. Craig, tell me this isn't true. Craig turned to her, and for 1 second I saw who he really was. Not angry, terrified. Diane, your mother did this. She set this up. She's been trying to destroy us since. Since what? I asked quietly. Since you called my mother's recipe box dumpster trash? Since you asked my daughter if I dug it out of the garbage? Since you told her she should be embarrassed by where she came from? Craig's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Diane looked at me, then at Craig, then at Patricia Huang. Is he going to be arrested? That's up to the FBI, Patricia said. But the evidence is substantial. Judith stood up, her chair scraping the floor. This is a setup. This woman, she pointed at me, is manipulating all of you. She's a seamstress. She presses clothes. She owns 24 properties, Martin Cho said from the doorway. I hadn't told anyone he was coming, but Martin had a sense for dramatic timing. He walked in carrying a leather portfolio. She's been my client for 15 years. She's built a real estate portfolio worth $28 million, and she's donated more money to Bridgeport community organizations than your entire family has earned in 3 generations. The room was so quiet I could hear the traffic on State Street, 3 floors below. Judith grabbed her coat and left without a word. Craig followed her, Patricia Huang and David Chen right behind them. I heard their footsteps descend the stairwell, heard the front door slam, heard a car engine start and tires screech on wet pavement. Diane didn't move. She sat back down, slowly, and stared at the table. The other guests had gone silent during the confrontation. Now, Maria touched Diane's shoulder gently. Your mama's a good woman, she said. She feeds my kids every Tuesday. Thomas nodded from his wheelchair. She paid for my dental work last year. Wouldn't let me pay her back. Linda's daughters came and stood next to me. Grandma Ruth, the older one said, are you really a millionaire? I'm a seamstress, I said. Who happens to own some buildings? Diane looked up at me, mascara running, lips trembling. You knew about Craig. Before the christening, I suspected. After the christening, I confirmed it. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? She closed her eyes. No, I know. I called your apartment small. I told Craig your job was embarrassing. I let Judith make fun of your dress. Her voice broke completely. I let him throw away Grandma's recipe box. He didn't throw it away. I took it back. The deed. $4.3 million. In an envelope I never opened. In an envelope nobody opened. Diane put her face in her hands and sobbed. Not the delicate kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, the place where shame and regret and 20 years of wrong choices live. Phil came over and sat beside her. He didn't say anything. Just put his hand on her back, father and daughter, together for the first time in years, while the woman who'd built an empire from a sewing machine stood 10 feet away, waiting. After 5 minutes, Diane looked up. What do I do now? You start over. How? Come to work. She blinked. At the dry cleaner? At my buildings. I need someone to manage the housing project here. 12 apartments, tenant applications, maintenance coordination. It pays $40,000 a year. I've never managed anything. I've never had a business degree. I learned by doing. So will you. What about Lily? Lily will grow up watching her mother work. That's the best education I can give her. Diane stood slowly. She looked around the room at the folding chairs and mismatched china and centerpieces made from autumn leaves, at the families who were starting to clear plates and wash dishes in the industrial kitchen, at Thomas offering pecan pie to Maria's kids, at Linda's daughters wiping down tables without being asked. This is what you built, Diane said. This is what work looks like when it has purpose. She nodded. Then she picked up a dish towel and started drying plates. 6 months later, Sterling Heights opened. Not the name of a fancy estate, the name I gave to the 12 affordable apartments on the upper floors of 142 State Street. Diane managed the entire renovation. She oversaw contractors, reviewed applications, coordinated with the housing authority. She worked 12-hour days and didn't complain once. Craig pleaded guilty to wire fraud in April. He received 18 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay $410,000 in restitution. Judith hadn't spoken to Diane since Thanksgiving. The divorce was finalized in March. On move-in day, I stood on the sidewalk and watched families carry boxes up the stairs. Maria and her 3 kids got Unit 4B. Thomas got 2A, ground floor, wheelchair accessible. A young firefighter and his wife got 3C. A retired postal worker got 1A. Diane stood next to me, Lily on her hip, clipboard in hand. She was wearing jeans and work boots. Her hair was in a ponytail. She looked tired and proud and completely different from the woman who'd been embarrassed by a recipe box 7 months ago. "Mom," she said. "Yeah? I want to show you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a wooden box. Maple wood. Dovetail joints. Brass latch. My mother's recipe box. "I had it restored," she said. "The water damage from the christening fountain. I found a woodworker in New Haven who specializes in antique restoration." I took it. Opened the lid. Inside, my mother's recipe cards, carefully dried and preserved, each one in a clear plastic sleeve. "I read them all," Diane said. "Every single recipe. Her handwriting, her notes in the margins. Add more cinnamon, Ruthie likes it sweet." Her voice cracked. "She wrote your name in her recipes." "She did. I'm going to teach Lily every single one." I closed the lid and held the box against my chest. "That's the real inheritance." Diane put her arm around me. It was the first time she'd hugged me in 4 years. That night, I walked back to my 1-bedroom apartment above the laundromat. I could live anywhere. I could buy a penthouse on the water. I could retire tomorrow and never press another shirt. But I'll be at the dry cleaner Monday morning at 6 a.m. because the work is the point. It's always been the point. I put the recipe box on the kitchen table next to my mother's photo, opened the lid one more time. Under the recipe cards, in the false bottom, the deed to 142 State Street was back in its envelope. Still unsigned, still waiting. Lily will get it when she's ready. When she understands that the woman who pressed shirts and mended hems wasn't just surviving. She was building something that would outlast all of us. Still with me? Drop a comment. If you've ever been judged by your job instead of your character, I want to hear your story. My son-in-law called my gift garbage. My daughter let him. But that recipe box held $4.3 million and 60 years of my mother's love. They saw old wood. I saw legacy. Now let me be honest with you. Don't do exactly what I did. Don't hide your life from the people you love and wait for them to fail a test they didn't know they were taking. I almost lost my daughter because I chose silence when I should have chosen honesty. Talk to your children. Tell them your story. Show them your struggle before a crisis forces the truth out. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job? Have you watched someone you love choose image over substance? Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that there is dignity in every kind of work. Subscribe to Sapphire Revenge for more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moments, because your story matters, and someone out there needs to hear it. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time is valuable, and I'm honored you spent it here. Some details in this story are fictionalized for storytelling purposes. If this content isn't for you, feel free to explore our other videos. There's something here for everyone. God bless you. And remember, it wasn't junk. It was legacy.